But here's the important thing. Watch what he says now. Because they've disobeyed the Lord, and they've mixed with these pagan nations around them, and they've compromised now. Look what it says in verse 9. Here's what happened. Here's the result of that. Aliens have devoured his strength, but he doesn't know it. Yes, gray hairs are here, and they're on him, yet he doesn't know it. They've lost their strength as a nation. Please note that. They've lost their strength as a nation. They've lost their strength militarily. They've lost their strength economically. They've lost their strength in the world politically. They're not as strong as they used to be as a country. And note this, they didn't know it. They didn't know they weren't strong anymore. They didn't know that they weren't as powerful as they once were. They still think they're strong. They still think they're prosperous as they ever were. And they don't realize as a nation how much they've declined or how weak they've become. They don't realize what has happened to them. It says their hair has turned gray, and they don't even know it. Meaning the nation is nearing the end of its life and doesn't even realize it. You know, it's a funny thing when you get older. And you think that you're still young and just as capable as you ever were to do the things you used to be able to do that came so easily to you when you were young. You know, when I was in middle school, I had a skateboard. And it was my wheels. You know, I'd take it all over the place, ride my skateboard around. A few years back, one of my sons, he had one of those Razor scooter things. And I thought I'd be a super cool dad and ride it down the sidewalk and turn the corner on this thing. That was my intention. I ended up with one of my shoes off and laying on my back in the grass. I don't even know what happened. But one of my sons said, "Dad, that was the coolest thing I've ever seen," right? And there was a car driving by our house at that time, and I remember I just laid there in the grass until the car got all the way by because I was too embarrassed to get up, right? When I was 12, I could do that. You just don't realize you're getting older. I remember when I was a kid, my dad could throw a football like, man, he could just zing it. And I would stand like two neighbors' yards over, and he would just let it fly, poof, right? And a few years back, my dad was in his 80s, and we were down in Florida visiting him, and my sons had a football. We went out in the yard, and my dad, you know, all of the mechanics were there. It looked right, but the ball went like 10 feet and hit the ground. My dad was shocked. Getting older, not even realizing it. Things that used to be easy, can't do them anymore. That's what happened to the nation of Israel. These things used to be easy for us as a nation. These things weren't hard at all. You know, we were prospering. We were winning all of our battles. But not anymore. The economy's not the same as it used to be. Their strength was devoured, and they didn't even know it. And in the minds of the people, in the minds of the people in Israel at that time, there was absolutely no connection between their prosperity and strength as a nation and their spiritual state as a nation. In their minds, there's no relationship. There's no correlation. In fact, they despised the prophets for suggesting their decline was related to their spiritual bankruptcy. To even make the suggestion that there was a connection. And so verse 10, and the pride of Israel testifies to his face, but they do not return to the Lord their God nor seek him. For all of this, their pride as a nation kept them from turning to God for help. They were stiff-necked, the Bible says. They were stubborn. They refused to humble themselves. They refused to seek the Lord for help. Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 3 says they refuse to be ashamed of their sin. Psalm 10, verse 4 says, in his pride the wicked man does not seek God. In all his thoughts there's no room for God. I don't need God. I don't need God's help. I can do this. I'll be fine without him. Verse 11, Ephraim also is like a silly dove without sense. They call to Egypt. They go to Assyria. They were like a silly dove. If you've ever watched a dove fly, a dove will fly one direction and then suddenly change directions and go the other direction. And they'll just kind of go back and forth like they don't know where they're going. They're just going back and forth. That's what Israel was doing as a nation in their final days. They're just going back and forth, flying around, going one direction, then going another direction. Israel began to realize their weakness. They began to realize they needed help. And like a dove flying, they'd go to Egypt for help, and then they'd go to Assyria for help, and then they'd go back to Egypt for help, and they just kind of kept going back and forth like this. They turned from one nation to the other. They never looked to the Lord. Man, they never looked to the Lord. Never occurred to them. Now, we'll just make another political alliance. We'll just go to Egypt. Egypt can help us. Egypt is strong. They've got chariots. They've got horses. And just going back and forth. And they thought they could solve their challenges politically, political answers. But the problem was spiritual.